Daniel Boone, the famous American frontiersman, had a fatal run-in with a creature that sounds a lot like the Bigfoot of today. We explore that case right now on American Strangeness. Daniel Boone biographer John Mack Farragher wrote that Boone often shared a tall tale late in life about how he had shot and killed a hairy, approximately 10-foot giant that Boone called a Yahoo. While living in the settlement he founded at Boonesboro, Kentucky, in spring, presumably in the late 1770s, Boone and one of his sons were out tracking indigenous horse thieves near present-day Cincinnati on the Ohio River. After realizing they were approaching a native band numbering 500, the duo wisely decided to turn back. Boone and his son briefly separated while crossing a hill below the mouth of the Licking River when Boone heard several gunshots from his son's direction. Boone rushed over and saw the largest man he had ever seen attacking his son. The giant ripped the gun away from his son, breaking it, and lifted the young man over his head as one might raise up a child. The monster body-slammed Boone's son twice to the ground and was about to do so again, possibly killing him. Boone carefully aimed his rifle and fatally shot the giant, who fell upon his son. After freeing and reviving the young man, Boone examined the corpse of the fallen beast. It was pale yellow, with long yellowish hair on its head, and short hair, not very thick, covering its body. The giant measured about 10 feet, 8 inches, and had very large feet and hands. Boone was said to have given this account in 1817. According to Farragher, Boone frequently carried a copy of his favorite book, Gulliver's Travels, on his journeys into the wilderness. He enjoyed reading it by the campfire, either to himself or aloud to companions. Boone was clearly familiar with the uncouth, primitive creatures called Yahoos, featured in Jonathan Swift's 1726 satirical work. The Yahoos are essentially livestock of the Houyhnhnms, and that's hard to pronounce, a race of intelligent talking horses. Protagonist Lemuel Gulliver described the Yahoos he encountered as follows. At last I beheld several animals in a field, and one or two of the same kind sitting in trees. Their shape was very singular and deformed, which a little discomposed me, so that I lay down behind a thicket to observe them better. Some of them coming forward near the place where I lay gave me an opportunity of distinctly marking their form. Their heads and breasts were covered with a thick hair, some frizzled and others lank. They had beards like goats, and a long ridge of hair down their backs, and the foreparts of their legs and feet, but the rest of their bodies was bare, so that I might see their skins, which were of a brown buff color. They had no tails, nor any hair at all on their buttocks, except about the anus, which, I presume, nature had placed there to defend them as they sat on the ground. For this posture they used, as well as lying down, and often stood on their hind feet. They climbed high trees as nimbly as a squirrel, for they had strong extended claws before and behind, terminating in sharp points, and hooked, they would often spring and bound and leap with prodigious agility. The females were not so large as the males. They had long, lank hair on their heads, but none on their faces, nor anything more than a sort of down on the rest of their bodies, except about the anus and pudenda. The dugs hung between their forefeet, and often reached almost to the ground as they walked. The hair of both sexes was of several colors, brown, red, black, and yellow. Upon the whole, I never beheld, in all my travels, so disagreeable an animal, or one against which I naturally conceived so strong an antipathy. Gulliver was later approached in the road by a menacing Yahoo and struck it with the flat end of his short sword. This resulted in at least 40 of the creatures charging across the field at him, howling and making odious faces. Gulliver ran to a tree and leaned back against its trunk, waving around his sword to keep the Yahoos away. He continued, "Several of this cursed brood, getting hold of the branches behind, leaped up into the tree, whence they began to discharge their excrements on my head. However, I escaped pretty well by sticking close to the stem of the tree, but was almost stifled with the filth which fell about me on every side." Despite his complete revulsion at the Yahoos, Gulliver eventually comes to disdainfully conclude that humans are merely Yahoos, with reason. On August 30th, 1818, an animal resembling, quote, the yoho, or wild man of the woods, was reported by a gentleman of unquestioned veracity in the vicinity of Ellsburg on the northern border of New York State. The hairy man stepped out of the woods within a few rods, which is about 50 feet, of the surprised witness, stood and looked at him for a moment, then turned and fled. The yoho bent forward as he ran on narrow feet that spread at the toes. Hundreds of searchers went looking for the creature, but nothing further was found. This apparently wasn't the first sighting in the area. The frequent and positive manner in which this story comes induces us to notice it, stated the local press. We wish not to impeach the veracity of this highly favored gentleman, yet it is proper that such naturally improbable, if not impossible events, should be established by the mouth of at least 2 or 3 eyewitnesses to entitle them to credibility. As for Boone country, the Yahoo swirls in the stew of Kentucky folklore. Yahoo Falls and nearby Yahoo Arch, with Yahoo pronounced Yeho by some local residents, are scenic stops within the Daniel Boone National Forest in McCreary County, Kentucky. One folk tale from the Appalachian Mountains in eastern Kentucky tells of a man who was staying near a cave when a female Yeho took notice of him. She would come by every day and throw a deer at him, seemingly as a gift. Eventually, she came down to visit him and they slept together. They had a child, but the man got the urge to leave, and the Yeho insisted he stay. The man convinced her that they would leave together on a ship, but he tricked her and boarded the vessel, crossing the waters without her. The enraged Yeho screamed from the shoreline, and realizing she had lost the man forever, tore the baby in 2 and threw one half after him. Kentucky folklorist Leonard Roberts collected a handful of slightly different versions of this tale about a strong and hairy wild woman falling dangerously in love with a human male from different informants between 1948 and 1954. During my youth in these mountains, reflected Roberts, it was not unusual to hear a rumor of some half-wild man, naked and hairy, being found in the woods, living close to the animal state. Roberts wasn't sure how this story had entered Kentucky mountain folklore, and acknowledged it wasn't unique to the region. Another example of this tale explains how Yoho Cave in Maine got its name, with the gender reversal of a male Yoho kidnapping a human girl who was out picking raspberries, holding her captive and mating with her, and later tearing apart their infant when she escapes. Similar stories have been sourced from diverse locales such as French Canada, Italy, Portugal, and Persia. Andros Island in the Bahamas has a tradition of fearsome hairy men called Yahoos who move in groups within the pine yards. It is clear that Jonathan Swift's story had an influence on the wild man tales that emerged in the century following its publication and beyond. It is, however, nebulous if Daniel Boone influenced the presence of the Yahoo in Kentucky folklore, or if it was already there and influenced him. Or, if we take the story at face value, did Daniel Boone kill a Bigfoot?